It stands for nothing, so that when the United States says the people against John Brown, they are speaking of the essence of republicanism, that power resides within the people and that power devolves upwards to agents of the state. In the Westminster system, it is the other way around. Power derives at the top and devolves downwards. And all persons who act within that state act on behalf of the monarch. Some Barbadians now are pausing to ask whether we are a republic or whether we are Westminster. And the real answer to that is related to the active and real use of power in this country. And I repeat that it is untenable for this country to be plodding along without a republican constitution while claiming to be a republic. Plodding along with a republican constitution inhering with Westminster values. I say to the Honorable Attorney General, who's been very active after lunch, that a constitution is of highest priority. No, it is urgent. It is more urgent than what this parliament is doing today, because what this parliament does today is an exercise in futility, except that it gives us a chance to examine the anatomy of this government and to find it wanting. Bring the Republican Constitution and bring it with urgency. Don't interrupt the business, the people's business. If you claim that you're a republic, do not interrupt the people's business with any election. And if you bring the election, well, I am not a prophet. I am not a prophet. You were given 5 years. But bring the Republican Constitution. Give public life. Give this nation constitutional substance. This government must not be allowed to hide behind the ultimate prime ministerial power that is afflicting public life in this country. I make bold to say that no one is sure as to where power and authority lies, because this country now sits in no man's land. And hardly a person speaks of power unless in the same sentence they call the title prime minister, as if that nomenclature of prime minister equates with power, ultimate power. And that is the sad state of affairs in the political and constitutional life of this country. Am I supposed to remain silent on that, man? No, I will not still my voice. The people of this country have too much to claim. And the people of this country will demand a Republican Constitution. The people of this country will demand that an election is not used to ambush political parties, and more so to ambush the people of this country. Do what must be done and do it properly. And I therefore reject this proposal for any hierarchies within this parliament. At a practical level, where these national MPs going to sit next to you, man? Or on this platform? And the commoners, I don't know, well, not the commoners, call them that. The ones from the constituencies. I don't know if they'll put the honorable member for St. Lucie somewhere. Well, he won't be back anyhow, but I don't know where he will sit. Because I assume he will be a constituency MP. He will deal with the bus service and the lights and the state of the roads. While, well, I don't wish to be invidious, but maybe there are others who will be elevated, reminiscent of the House of Lords, and they will be the lords of the manor. And they will probably sit on this platform and look down on the commoners. Maybe. Maybe. That is not the only reason why I prefer when you occupy that chair, man. But this parliament and the people of this country will hear me say that if there's to be any representational hierarchy in this country under a Republican constitution, there must be 3 tiers of representation. At the apex, a Senate. Under the Senate, the House of Assembly, where every member is equal, as is now. And a 3rd tier, we deliberated for some, even through COVID, maybe 2 years, and came up with a scheme of local government and asked this government. I remember going to the cabinet. I was a very well-behaved backbencher, you know, man. And I visited the cabinet one day upon invitation. And I presented the proposal of that commission on local governance, all 11 of us, including the one who now writes the Bob Marley speeches, including him. And we came up with what we thought was a brilliant proposal for representation at the local level, and we asked this government to make that a 3rd tier of representation at the local level. Ma'am, I'm not going to give you the details, but I will tell you this. One of the important proposals is that it was non-partisan. Because we felt that people who lived on a street next to each other, who sat on a local council, should not find themselves divided by partisanship. And it was such a beautiful document. It was such a beautiful proposal. May I ask this government today, where is it? I think the Prime Minister the Honorable Prime Minister referred to it today, but I want to know where it is. And rather than hand it to the people of this country, this government is handing to the people of this country a parliament that will divide itself along lines of ancient elitism, where the honorable member for St. Lucie, if he survives, unlikely though, will be a mere constituency representative, and his more favored friends, whose names I'm tempted to call, I am really tempted, they will become national MPs in this place. And this is what the people of Barbados are hearing today, endorsed by the Honorable Prime Minister, that this Parliament must now be divided, and in the short time that the Honorable Member for St. Lucie has left, he will be relegated to the peripheries of this chamber, while his more favored friends, and if they get me pets, I can call him. You want me to call a name? You want me to call a name? You love a hierarchy.
With my permission, sir.
You might be on the periphery.
With my permission, sir, only.
You might get punished for that with this statement here. Don't forget. And so, Your Honor, that is my position on this proposal for national MPs. Not to criticize the commission. There are some distinguished people there, but we reserve the right, speaking on behalf of freedom-loving people in this country, people who are committed to democratic principle, we reserve the right to disagree. And we disagree fundamentally on this issue of national MPs sitting in a parliament with something called constituency MPs, a return to elitism. But if this government finds itself embracing a value system in which elitism must be preserved within the context of republicanism, then it reveals that the government's understanding of republicanism is not well-grounded. It is misconceived. Let us come, though, to one of the other proposals, overseas voting. And we do notice that the Commission rejected overseas voting. We have been engaging the diaspora for some time. And I don't know if the government has been similarly engaging the diaspora. I'm not going to take it upon myself, speaking as an individual, to voice my individual view on that of a parliament, a government, a society. But I would want to encourage the government to listen to the voice of those in the diaspora, some of whom still live here, 3 months here, 3 months there, 3 months here, 3 months there. Some of whom may still have properties here. I would encourage and invite the government to listen to those voices. It is a very contentious issue, and it is not an easy issue to deal with. But how do you dismiss nationalist and patriotic commitment without a discussion? I am not stating a position, ma'am. I'm just encouraging the government to embrace that nationalist and patriotic commitment to this country. There are some people who never really, in many ways, settled in the countries that they adopted and that adopted them. And you speak to a man or a woman who has been in his adopted country for 40, 50 years, even with citizenship. And when he says home, he's talking about Barbados. So that let us not be so insensitive as to entirely dismiss that patriotism with the two-letter word no. Let us engage them. And let us see if there is some ground, some accommodation with condition. Because the rational view will be that if you don't live here, maybe the answer would be no. But do they make a valid claim that even if they're not ordinarily resident here, and that's the term that lawyers will use, even if you're not ordinarily resident here, maybe there is a sense in which you are sufficiently resident here through the ownership of property and the payment of taxes, important, and the remittances that are made, and the lives that are well lived here because of their generosity. It is worthy of discussion, and it is a worthy discussion. I am not today taking a position, ma'am. The only position I take today is that the government, and any government, should take these claims seriously. Permit me to move on to the question of an independent speaker. And I will say briefly, maybe it has nothing to do with my own peculiar experience here over the last year and some months. I must not speak subjectively, I must speak objectively. And beyond my peculiar experience of being alone on this side, and as I always say, though not lonely, I am still of the view, Your Honor, that the office of the Speaker should be judicial and not political. And that the holder of the office in which you sit today, ma'am, should have a term that exceeds the term of a government in Parliament. That if it is 5 years, the Speaker would sit for 7 or 8 years to guarantee, or as some guarantee, of independence and impartiality. It really does ask a bit much of a speaker who represents a constituency, who sits in a government, who attends parliamentary group meetings of a government, who functions fully as a member of the government, except that he's called upon to make rulings such as you are called upon today, ma'am. It really asks a bit much of that person to make that intellectual leap to impartiality and independence. It is possible. It is possible, ma'am. But an institution wishes to guarantee, not to you, ma'am, in that office, but it is a guarantee that must be given to the public. And it is a guarantee that must be given to a parliament, that he or she who sits in speakership must be, according to its structural arrangements, independent and impartial. Today, that is not an easy thing to achieve. And I speak not only of today, but all of the yesterdays that have gone before us in this Parliament. The office of Speaker has been a difficult office because there has been no legal and structural guarantee as to his independence or impartiality. In a republic, and a modern republic, Your Honor, that must change. The office must become judicial and cease to be political. Enough on that, Your Honor. It may be of some embarrassment to this government that at paragraph 21, the Commission recommends that there should be no more than 12 ministers and no more than 12 ministries. I did not expect the Honorable Prime Minister to disclose that today, here, in this public place, to the people of Barbados, in a country that has had a cabinet of twice that number. And I will turn and look at the Honorable Member for St. Lucie when I say that. Here we have a recommendation from a Parliamentary Reform Commission which recommends 12 ministries and 12 ministers, and this government is parading across this country with twice that number. Need I say more to the people of Barbados? That this commission is confronting this government with a proposal that collides frontally with the practice of this government. Even the commission, ma'am, even the commission established by this government, headed by a former president of the Senate and a long-standing member of the party in government, the distinguished one himself. And I see nothing in the report that says that his was a dissenting voice. And he now must take collective responsibility for a commission that is confronting this government, that impliedly accuses this government of waste of public resources in funding a cabinet that is twice as large, with a few extras, as what the commission recommends. It's the largest cabinet in the history of this country, and it is a cabinet headed by an honorable prime minister who complained when there were 17 in the previous cabinet. And at the time, maybe that was the biggest cabinet ever. But if the honorable member for St. Michael Northeast likes to compete, the honorable prime minister has shown in this propensity for competition that she can outdo 17, and that she can go to 24 or 26 or whatever the number used to be. And the ladies and gentlemen, distinguished as they are, all honorable men and women, maybe meet some embarrassment in trampling upon each other's political and administrative terrain. Because there was a time, admittedly, when I was not sure, when I was fighting for those noble fisher folk, I was not sure whether it was under the ministry of the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central or the Honourable Member for St. Philip South. I was not sure who was responsible for the fish markets. I really was not sure. And I hope that those ministers were sure. I don't know if it is possible for a man to leave home and end up in the wrong office, but this government has had so many ministers that if I were to hear that that has happened, it would not surprise me. But the point is made. Paragraph 23, and I'm not bashful about this, crossing the floor. And I will not call names, but there was a dissenting view, not supported wisely by the Commission, that if the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northwest wishes to cross the floor tomorrow, he can. He can. Because the Constitution protects him. However he feels about the front bench, the Constitution allows him freedom of association, and thankfully, the chairman of the Commission was a lawyer. Well, is a lawyer. He's still very much with us, and I trust in good health. So that the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northwest, in his state of trouble, some of it relieved. Political troubles may still be on the horizon, but if he wishes to cross the floor, and this is not a public invitation, nor private,
You're begging.
but if he does it, he sits down there by the Honourable Member for St. James North. He can go down there with you. So that is resolved by a constitutional right to freedom of association, man. So the dissenting voice, whose name I shall not call, I understand why there would have been dissent from that individual. That individual is what you call a real loyalist. The tribalism of politics really resides within her political bosom more than most. And any departure from the tribe is a departure that must be punished with political death. And that is her philosophical approach to politics. If you are not with me, you must die politically. Not in a republic, though, and not in a republic with a constitution which guarantees the right to freedom of association. And the emphasis there is on freedom. I feel so free. I really do. And that is a story I will tell at another time. I will pass briefly at the composition of the Senate at paragraph 27 of the report. Paragraph 27 of the report, which deals, yes, with composition of the Senate. And it says that the Commission is of the view that it is important to increase the opposition voice in the Senate, as well as to ensure that certain groups are represented in the Senate. And quite nobly, some of those categories articulated are representation of the elderly, the youth, LGBTQ, small business, trade unions, or trade union movement. In this morning's speech, I did not hear any deliberations on that. But the people of Barbados are entitled to know that there was a proposal that the Senate should be constituted among persons representing interest groups, being the elderly, the youth, LGBTQ, small business, trade unions, or the trade union movement. Paragraph 34 is one that you would appreciate that it troubles me, Your Honor. This is the Public Accounts Committee, and I'm wrapping up very soon. I am only dealing with those ones that I consider salient. There are others. The Public Accounts Committee. And this has not been a good story for this country. In 2003, this Public Accounts Committee was established by an Act of Parliament, which put in majority members of the government. The parliamentary government, and not only the parliamentary government, ma'am, but members of the cabinet. And as you know, ma'am, and as the people of Barbados know by now, that the Public Accounts Committee investigates government spending, and not only government spending, but irregularity related to government spending. And how do you investigate irregularity in relation to government spending and have among the investigators members of a cabinet who would have sat in collective responsibility for the same spending? How do you ask them to be investigators as well? Do they investigate themselves? Do they say, I am guilty? Ma'am, it does not make sense. But what I experienced as chairman of the Public Accounts Committee got even worse. That when I tried to investigate Hope, when I tried to make the Hope Housing Project a matter for public investigation by the Public Accounts Committee, a group of ministers of this cabinet came to that Public Accounts Committee and voted that it should not be investigated as a matter of priority. And I insisted, and they insisted too. And they said, look, you may be the chairman, but every one of us in here has a vote. I'm not going to say they cajole me, but they use what they interpreted to be their power. To be their power, and they say that any matter that came before the Public Accounts Committee was subject to a vote. Even a matter of particular investigation, that they could decide what I say, not by the despotic exercise of power, but in a matter in which the public had a vested interest, because it was $60 million of taxpayers' money that went somewhere, and it did not go overseas. And those goodly ministers and others took a vote and said, you shall not investigate that. People of Barbados, that is what happened. Must I be afraid? Must I be afraid to say that? Must I be afraid to reflect and relate my experience as chairman of a Public Accounts Committee that was frustrated in its effort to investigate suspected irregularity in relation to public funds in the amount of $60 million for a housing project that is still hobbling today? And there can be no firm proof as to where the $60 million has gone. And in some cases, although it has gone, the government is still in the business of trying to repair the said houses. Where's the money coming from? That is not for an answer, that is rhetorical. The point I make now is that under this government, the Public Accounts Committee has been paralyzed. It has been paralyzed, Your Honor, and having been so paralyzed by this government's intervention at the Public Accounts Committee, who will be the guardian of public monies? I remember everyone that was in that room that fateful afternoon. when the work of the Public Accounts Committee was assassinated, when we were brought to a halt, and no one will now sit on that committee and allow its work to be conducted. And I send this notice to this government and to the people of Barbados that I'm coming back with it. And if I get resistance the second time, the people of Barbados will know, because the hearings of the PAC are not to be kept private. It is a matter of public business because it is a matter of public funds. And it must not be kept private. And the work of the Public Accounts Committee, which is the only body that supervises government spending on behalf of the people of Barbados, must be allowed to continue. I am coming back. But today, Your Honor, we are dealing with the Parliamentary Reform Commission report, which I still say is futile, because this report will not advance Parliament in this country unless it is discoursed upon within the context of constitutional reform. Is this exercise today futile? Are we merely taking up parliamentary time? And so, Your Honor, that is where we are today. I close, Your Honor, by asking this government to suspend this activity today and to replace today's business with the report of the Constitutional Review Commission. I think that's the name. If this government wishes to be taken seriously as a government interested in constitutional reform, parliamentary reform is only properly dealt with within the context of larger constitutional reform. And I ask this government to suspend this business and to come to this country with urgency with a Republican Constitution. A Republican Constitution in which power derives and devolves from the people upwards, as opposed to a Westminster Constitution in which power derives and devolves from upwards downwards, except that in Barbados today, ultimate power is being exercised in this constitutional vacuum by an omnipotent and all-powerful Prime Minister. That is the state of political life in Barbados. That is the state of constitutional life in Barbados. And it is thriving in a state where there is a constitutional vacuum, where we are describing ourselves as a republic only because we have localized the office of the head of state. Yes, we are a republic because the head of state is local. But beyond that, none of the traditions of Westminster now visit this country constitutionally and politically. Ultimate power resides in the Prime Minister. And that is why I say a Republican Constitution is urgent, not for the sake of window dressing, but for the sake of freedom, justice, and democracy in this country. So that institutions must know that they have powers that are independent. Institutions of state must know that they have powers that are independent and that they can function impartially, except that every ministerial discourse in this country now admits that nothing is done unless it is done with the condonation of that office called Prime Minister. And it is said quite blandly, but it is true. The public says it, the public knows it, the public hears it, the public experiences it every day. Every news report. I am not here to condemn, but Maybe if a minister speaks as to the work in his ministry, and he or she learns to speak independently in defense of the dignity and the integrity and the independence of the office, except for collective responsibility, unless he or she learns to speak the language of ministerial responsibility, then he or she admits to prime ministerial autocracy. The former member for St. Peter used a different word. He used the word despotism. And there are many people in Barbados who now consider his words the words of prophecy. And it need not be prophecy, except that the Prime Minister must be told that the ultimate power in this country is the Constitution and not the Prime Minister. And the people of Barbados are weighted under by the ultimate exercise of prime ministerial power, because we have suspended the Republican Constitution and we remain with Westminster, except that we have dismissed the British Crown, replaced it with a titular local head of state, and I use the word titular. But that real political power now resides in the hands of one person. And that display of power within Westminster tradition allows one person in this country to determine when elections will be called. That is not a feature of republicanism. A feature of republicanism would be that a term of government is fixed. Whether 4 years or 5, it is fixed. So that an election date is not a matter of ambush. An election date is properly fixed within a Republican Constitution where representative government properly exists, where power is genuinely exercised on behalf of the people and not by the whim, not by the arbitrary action of one person who will determine that all activities of the state, from the police back to any other institution, will be at the whim and fancy of one person who happens to be called the Prime Minister. That is the state of Barbados. That is the constitutional state of Barbados. And we realize this document today, this document, for all intents and purposes, ma'am, is useless. And I mean no disrespect to those who sat on the commission, because they ought to have been the Constitutional Reform Commission. When one looks at the qualification and the content of the commission, the Parliamentary Reform Commission, they ought to have been the Constitutional Reform Commission. But this comes today while the other report remains hidden from public view. I don't know when they'll bring it, but this country needs a proper intervention by a government into the public domains of this country to ask this country how it feels about a new constitution and how it feels about what should be the content of that new Republican Constitution. But, as I said, government's chief law officer told this country a few months ago, it is not a priority. And I repeat, the reason it is not a priority is because maybe this government is comfortable with dictatorship. Maybe, just maybe. And don't be alarmed that I said that, ma'am. That is a view that is honestly held. That this government seems quite content with dictatorship. And the people of Barbados must be relieved from dictatorship. And the words of the former Honorable Prime Minister and representative for St. Peter must now be put to rest. And if his words are not to be put to rest, if this government continues on its trajectory, his words will not be put to rest. That's what I meant to say. That if this government continues on its present trajectory, the words of the former honorable member for St. Peter remain words of prophetic truth, that this country remains subject to despotism. You've been very patient, ma'am. I'm obliged to you.